What is the mission of the Strategic Issues Team at the Government Accountability Office, GAO? What is the goal of GAO's High Risk Series? And what are the fiscal management and performance challenges facing government executives today? I'll explore these questions and so much more with my very special guest, Michelle Sager, Managing Director of GAO's Strategic Issues Team. Michelle, you are the Managing Director of the Strategic Issues Team at GAO, and I was hoping you could help us understand and outline how GAO is organized, and more importantly, where your portfolio fits into that organization, and outline for us some of the key topics and areas of focus under your portfolio.
Definitely. And I will freely admit at the outset that when someone hears strategic issues, it's not intuitive what that means. So I often hear from my own family as well as from new staff, well, that sounds really important, but I have no idea what that means. So I'll definitely explain that. At kind of the highest level, GAO is largely organized by subject matters. So we have 15 mission teams that support our external strategic goals. And then we also have internal staff offices and operations teams that support everything we do about conducting our work. So each of these 15 mission teams, including strategic issues, manages a portfolio of projects to ensure that we meet congressional needs for independent and unbiased information and analysis. And the Strategic Issues Team helps Congress address a number of cross-cutting national challenges, and that includes the nation's fiscal health, census operations, tax policy and administration, regulatory issues, intergovernmental issues, and federal workforce planning. In addition to all of that, we also lead GAO's efforts to look broadly across the federal government at a number of multi-agency projects. So, for example, we lead GAO's High Risk Program, which identifies agencies and programs that are vulnerable to waste, fraud, abuse, or mismanagement, or are in need of fundamental transformation. And then in addition to that, we also lead GAO's work on opportunities to reduce fragmentation, overlap, and duplication, and achieve other financial benefits through either cost savings and revenue enhancements.
I was wondering, what are some of the top challenges you face in your position, Michelle, and how have you sought to address some of those challenges, maybe perhaps turn them into opportunities?
Definitely. And there are many challenges at any given time, and we continue to live in interesting times. So I won't focus on all of them, but I'll focus on just a couple that really stand out at this moment in time. And they're common throughout GAO as well as throughout many other organizations, particularly for entities that are part of what you might think of as the knowledge industry. So the first of these challenges is the ongoing challenge of continuing to thrive as we approach the 3-year anniversary of the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the second one that I want to focus on is envisioning the future of work. So first, in terms of continuing to thrive in a pandemic environment, we at GAO, as well as in strategic issues, have continued to maintain a flexible approach to our operations, both out of necessity, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, as well as because that helps us function really effectively. So for right now, much of our work continues to be conducted virtually. And we were really fortunate as an organization insofar as we had a tradition of telework in place. We were prepared to work remotely. And so we were really able to pivot literally almost overnight without disrupting our operations. And along the way, we've continued iterative improvements to many initiatives to support that virtual work, to support training, onboarding, as well as making sure that we're maintaining connectedness and capturing some of the kinds of things that we used to do to really facilitate teamwork in an in-person environment, even though many of us continue to work virtually. So that's one big ongoing challenge that is pretty common throughout the economy and is something that remains very much a work in progress. But I'm also really proud of the organization, and we've all absolutely benefited from what was in place pre-pandemic to allow us to make that pivot and continue delivering and producing results for Congress. So that's the first challenge. And then second, as we envision the future of work, we continue to consider a future that will support that remote or virtual posture, as well as hybrid work. And that will help us meet the needs of our clients, as well as make sure that we're obtaining information primarily from federal agencies and doing that efficiently and effectively. And along the way, of course, we function in a team-based environment. So maintaining that connectedness in the workplace continues to be very important, and we continue to refine our approach to doing so. And so in the midst of all of that, we also remain focused on making sure that we're conducting our work efficiently so that we can deliver timely information to Congress, while absolutely maintaining all of our quality assurance processes that define the nature of our objective, fact-based, nonpartisan analysis. So a lot of challenges, but we have also been able to make sure that we can leverage what was already in place and then respond to the moment, as well as just really clearly communicate with our client and with our federal agencies that we obtain information from along the way. So certainly those things continue to be a challenge, but I think we've definitely been able to take what was already in place and continue moving forward in a positive direction.
This year, as I understand it, GAO published its latest strategic plan, and it emphasizes strategic issues and potential future trends that may affect federal government and society at large. And that's what I find I like about the strategic plan that GAO puts out. But given your team's experience in strategic planning, what role did you or your team play in helping develop and shape GAO's own strategic plan?
So our team definitely played a role, and every entity at the organization plays a role in the strategic planning process. So as part of that process, we emphasize foresight, continuous environmental scanning, and trend analysis. And that helps us think about our decision making as well as our long-term planning. So for example, with insights from our Center for Strategic Foresight at GAO, our team works with them to identify emerging issues and challenges that pose both risks and opportunities for the federal government. In addition, as part of that planning process, and as an output that accompanied the GAO strategic plan, we worked together to identify 12 broad trends with likely effects on government and society in the next 5 to 15 years. As part of that process, one of the things that we do is we have a pretty extensive review of external literature. We have discussions with outside advisors and with experts. And then for our team, specifically the strategic issues team, our strategic planning process also includes input from all of the individuals on our team. So we're all part of this process. And as we conduct that work, we're talking to our congressional clients. We are building in our staff subject matter expertise. And we're also asking for everyone in the team to be thinking about strategic planning with a foresight lens as they do kind of continuous scanning of trends that help make sure that GAO remains an agile and responsive organization. So the way that plays out is that it's not kind of a one and done strategic plan that we complete, put on the shelf, and don't revisit, but we are continuously and periodically updating our key efforts and trends that can then reflect shifts in congressional priorities, as well as areas that we expect to be conducting work on based on this foresight work. And then we're making revisions along the way to our resource allocations and disclosing that in our annual performance plans that are available on GAO's website. So it's a pretty extensive process, and in some respects, I think a hallmark of organizations that conduct strategic planning really well is something that's reflected at GAO, that it's never really complete. We do have a strategic plan that is in place, but the process itself is one that is continuous and ongoing.
That's great to know. Now we can get into some of the core areas that you focus your time on. And I understand that in 2021, GAO issued the biennial update to the high-risk list report. And I was wondering, Michelle, what are some of the key high-risk areas that were identified in the latest report? What issues may have been removed? Perhaps you could share with us from the list. And what areas have been added over the since this last update?
So I'll give kind of the high level of this work, and this is one of many bodies of work that it's really a privilege to be a part of at GAO. It has existed now for a couple of decades, and it is a way that we help Congress focus attention on those issues that are some of the highest risks and also the greatest opportunities across the entire federal government. So we update this list at the beginning of every Congress. We're currently in the process of pulling together and updating the list for 2023, and we'll present that to Congress in the new year. And we currently have 38 areas that are designated as high risk, and they're designated as high risk due to vulnerabilities to fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement, or because they face economy, efficiency, or effectiveness challenges, or they're in need of fundamental transformation. One thing that was different in 2022 is that we added 2 new issues to the list, kind of outside of the regular 2-year cycle of our high-risk reports issued at the beginning of every new Congress. So our most recent areas added to the list were first, HHS, leadership and coordination of public health emergencies, and second, the unemployment insurance system. In addition, in March of 2022, we issued a kind of a special project that reported on key practices to help agencies successfully address high-risk areas and ideally eventually be removed from the list. And as we are conducting this work, one of the things that we keep very close track of is the financial benefits resulting from this focus on high-risk areas. And in the last 17 years, those financial benefits have totaled about $675 billion. So there are real results that result from this work. And those results also reflect some areas being removed from the list. There's sometimes a kind of urban myth, urban legend that once you're on the list, you stay there forever. And that is definitely not the case. So for example, in 2021, we removed an area known as Department of Defense Support Infrastructure Management because DoD had made great progress on the issue. For example, DAO had more efficiently used their leased space, they had reduced their infrastructure footprint, and they had reduced cost. And then in addition to that, over time, there are a number of areas that have been removed from the list that are really wide-ranging, everything from mitigating gaps in weather satellite data to establishing effective mechanisms for sharing and managing terrorist-related information to protect the homeland, to management of interagency contracting. In fact, since we began the list in 1990, we have added 66 areas to the high-risk list, and we have removed more than 40% of them in response to agencies showing sufficient progress to address the problems that we identify. And even for those areas that remain on the list, many of them have made meaningful progress and have demonstrated significant financial and non-financial benefits.
You know, Michelle, enhancing the customer experience is a key priority for the current administration. And I was wondering, to that end, would you tell us more about GAO's work in addressing the example I want to talk about is the recent work around persistent tax filing challenges that the IRS is dealing with. What are some of those core challenges that IRS is facing in the processing and implementing of tax law changes, say, that were in the CARES Act? And are there any recommendations from GAO to IRS on how to improve that process?
GAO has produced many, many reports as well as recommendations that address tax policy and administration, including reports every year on the tax filing season and taxpayer experience. So this is a really important topic for us, and I'm so glad you asked this question. You mentioned the CARES Act, and it is important to note that the IRS received additional funding as well as additional responsibilities during the pandemic. And those responsibilities included issuing economic impact payments or stimulus payments, as well as issuing monthly advanced child tax credit payments. So we have issued a number of reports on these topics, and one of our recent reports on the Internal Revenue Service and funding, as well as financial reporting controls and GAO recommendations, kind of summarized a lot of this work. So we have talked about open recommendations that GAO has made to IRS that IRS needs to take action on, and those fall into a couple of categories. One is to fully implement its workforce planning initiative, to identify agency-wide and division performance goals to address that customer service or taxpayer experience that you ask about, and then also to reestablish goals to improve voluntary compliance. To dive a little bit deeper, in February of 2022, we testified that IRS had experienced challenges in managing recent filing season. And that included difficulties hiring workers to process returns, as well as implementing tax law changes that arrived through public laws, including the CARES Act. These challenges contributed to a backlog of returns to process, as well as to taxpayers having difficulty reaching someone to talk to at the IRS. For example, IRS expected to answer only about 35% of incoming calls in the 2022 filing season. And to help manage those call volumes, IRS urged taxpayers to use something called Where's My Refund, an online tool, but that tool only provided limited information, and you were not always able to find answers to your question through the use of that tool. So we've made a number of recommendations to IRS to improve both processing and customer service. And then in 2022, the agency received a substantial sum of money, $79.4 billion over 10 years, to improve compliance, among other things. So we will continue tracking all of these things, including the taxpayer experience, as well as IRS action in response to our list. And I should note, IRS and tax law enforcement has been on our high risk list for many years, and that provides another avenue for us to continue following up on all of these really important issues related to tax policy and administration.
That's terrific. As we close our conversation, Michelle, I was wondering, are there 3 or so key takeaways you want to leave with our listeners?
Definitely. I think a couple things that I would highlight that are already in motion and that I would like your listeners to think about. One is I would definitely encourage anyone to visit the GAO website, gao.gov, and that is a place where they can explore topics of interest and also subscribe to updates regarding GAO's work. So in addition to timely information about everything in the federal purview, you can just skim the daily summary of issued products, and that I think is an important reminder of the importance of oversight as one element of the checks and balances in our government. Second, I would encourage any listeners to be in touch with any suggestions or targets of opportunity for improvement to government policies and programs. On GAO's homepage, you can find contact information for our Office of Public Affairs, for GAO's subject matter experts, as well as for FraudNet, which is a resource to share information about fraud. And then third, I would just like to share kind of a sense of the optimism that exists in terms of the country's future. We continue to live in interesting and challenging times, and whether it's the ongoing pandemic, climate change, workforce challenges, divisions on a whole host of issues, it can be kind of easy to sort of doom scroll through the news of the day and then walk away with a really negative view of where the country is headed. But in the midst of all of that, one of the things that I am reminded of every day as we conduct our work is that there are public servants at GAO and across the federal government who are really deeply committed to making sure that the government works as effectively and efficiently as possible, and that the government has strategies in place to grapple with these incredible challenges on many fronts. And so that's been one of the interesting side benefits of working at GAO, is that we have this opportunity to have a bird's eye view on a broad range of issues throughout the federal government. And in every interaction with congressional staff and with federal agency officials, I'm impressed by just the dedication of individuals who are really dedicated and devoted to public service, because they want to improve the country and they want to provide service to the American people and find solutions for the challenges facing our country.
This has been the Business of Government Hour, a conversation with Michelle Sager, Managing Director of GAO's Strategic Issues team. But be sure to join us next time for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government leadership and its effectiveness. Until then, subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at iTunes or on your favorite podcast app, and as always at businessofgovernment.org.